Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. Glad that you're with us. Lots, of course, to talk about with this year's Kentucky Derby. More than any Derby I can remember or probably ever will. And the man that called it is the voice of the Triple Crown and the Breeders' Cup on NBC, the voice of New York racing, and just the voice. Nobody better calling a race than my friend Larry Collmus. Larry, welcome into the Horse Racing Show.
Well, thanks for having me, Kenny. I've heard so many great things about this show, and I'm just happy to be on with you.
Well, thank you. You know, we try to have fun, try to have the personalities on and let people know a little bit about those in the business like you and, you know, talk about some of the topics of the day. Wonder what's the topic of the day, of the week? Probably the topic all the way till we get through the Preakness, huh?
I guess so. Yeah, it seems like a couple of people have mentioned the Kentucky Derby to me since Saturday, and wasn't a horse disqualified or something?
You know, is that amazing? As you were sitting up there, I'm down there with Bill Mott. You're up there watching the booth. I read this, it was 21 minutes and 57 seconds. So I guess that gave someone something to do is to put a clock on this. Did you have any idea? Because about the 15-minute mark, I'm not saying I knew it was 15 minutes, but, you know, it was a long time you're figuring in your head. I kind of thought something's going on here. I wasn't sure it was going to stand up, and at first I thought there's no way they'll have a DQ of the winner in the Derby. And after about 15 minutes, I thought, well, hold on, something is different here.
Well, I'll have to tell you about my personal experience. I was up where I call the race, which is actually just a couple of doors from the stewards who were making this decision. And I admittedly said, you know what, this probably won't take too long, you know, because inquiries take, 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to head downstairs and make sure I, get my ride out of there with everybody, because it takes me a while to get down from the seventh floor. So I made my way all the way down to the first level and over to where our NBC compound is, and went into the trailer where we hang out before the Derby.
Right.
And it's just me and Dale Earnhardt Jr. and the stewards have still not decided what they're going to do yet. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. This is still happening. So here I am explaining, what's going on with the steward's inquiry, and an objection to Dale Earnhardt Jr. I did not expect that to be the end of my day at Churchill Downs. And then they took the horse down, and I'm like, did this just happen? Did they disqualify the winner of the Kentucky Derby? This is unbelievable.
It is, and I've had people make, I think, good points on both sides. First off, there was interference. I'm not going to debate that, and the steward's call, they followed the letter of the law, in my opinion.
I agree. I think they made the right call, Kenny, honestly. After watching it, originally I thought there's no way you take down the Derby winner, but then I watched it from the different angles that you get to see it. And by the way, I really get a kick out of the people that tweet to me that, how dare you not mention this interference in your live race call? I'm like, it's not that simple. It's the angle where that happened. You don't see that live around the 5/16 pole. That's the toughest part of the track to see from my perspective. And there's no way I'm going to be able to, call that while it's happening. But, after seeing it a few times and from the high on top shot and the different angles, I think they made the right call in the long run. I think they probably could have done a little better job communicating what they were doing and what they were looking at, because, all that I saw was that Flavien Prat on Country House was claiming foul against Maximum Security, and he wasn't really bothered at all, but several other horses were.
Yeah, that was the thing I thought. And honestly, as I'm watching it, I'm standing out in the paddock with Bob Baffert and watching the race. And when you come in, I'm like you. Most people, I guarantee, did not pick up on that. They might have seen a little bit watching the camera. They might have seen just a little bit. You could tell that, I couldn't tell exactly how many of the horses were affected. You could see a little bit of pull-up, I thought, in War of Will. I was kind of keeping an eye on him. I thought he had a shot at getting up in the top 3 or 4. But no, I couldn't have said, wow, look at that interference there. I thought he might have checked a little bit. But, I'm listening to your call. I'm watching it. I'm kind of keeping an eye on Baffert. And I think most people, until after the fact, had a chance to look back at the great coverage of NBC. And that's not because we work for them. I thought it was terrific the way everything was handled. But, Yeah, I mean, it's not a spur of the moment. You take 19 horses out there, folks, take 19 anything and try to remember the name of it. And what Larry Collmus does is etched in stone. Everything the rest of us say is vapor. For years, that call will be replayed, and then they'll tell about what really happened after the race, not what happened during the race. It's not your job.
Yeah, sometimes you can see interference. If
Yeah.
if it happens right in front of you, the horses are coming, to the 16th pole, and two horses bump, and you see one veer in front of the other. That's one thing. You can pick up on that, but not 19 horses in the mud as they're turning for home in the Kentucky Derby. There's just too many things going on. The one thing I did see was when Bodie Express took up and started to drop back really quickly, and you don't realize at the time that it's because he was interfered with. You think, well, he's an 80-1 maiden. He just had enough,
Right.
But he was part of that mix that was bothered by Maximum Security's duck out there, and it unfortunately happened. The stewards, in my opinion, made the right decision, and we move on from there.
The one thing it's curious about this for me, and I read an article by my friend Mark Story, the Lexington Herald Leader, who did pose this question, which I think is a good question. What's changed? And I think he based a lot of that on what Bob Baffert said earlier this week, where Baffert said, in essence, I'm paraphrasing here, that you just don't come out with an objection at the Kentucky Derby. You can expect it's going to be a rough race. My horses have been compromised in the past. He's not talking about this Derby, but other derbies. And that's just the way it goes. It's not like any other race because of all the horses that are out there. Is that fair at all to ask that question, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there has been some sort of an unwritten rule that sort of everything goes in the Kentucky Derby because there's so many horses. The jockeys don't want to be the ones, claiming foul. I think also you have to think with the events of the year and the things that went on out in California, that horse safety is becoming, a huge priority. I mean, it always has been, but it's something that I think everybody's extra cautious about. And did that come into, the play of the stewards' decision that, the horses were put in an unsafe, position by Maximum Security coming out? Maybe, and that could be what's changed, but it's hard to say. I mean, there was interference for sure.
Watching Larry work, as I've had the privilege of doing for several years, I've known you, I don't know how long we've known each other, 20, 25 years? Something like that. And we've worked together since 2011 at NBC. I believe it's 2011, right?
It is. That was my first year when Animal Kingdom won the Kentucky Derby.
And he wasn't supposed to win that, right? I thought he was a grass horse. I never did understand that. That's what I've loved about how much the game has changed with training. In the past, you just write horses off. I would, at least, if they didn't have X number of starts in their 3-year-old year and things, just going back in the last 15 years or more to see. And if a horse laid off like a Barbaro comes in 6 weeks after Florida, no way he's going to win. That's what's really been interesting to me, how much the game has changed in the training methods and just the routes that some of these horses have taken to the Derby.
Yeah, there are different ways to get there, and Animal Kingdom's way was Turfway Park, and it worked, that on the synthetic track that day, and all of a sudden he shows up and just blows everybody's doors off coming on the outside in the Derby.
What amazed me about Larry, he's thoroughly prepared, and you got your iPad and you're looking over all the silks, and I mean, I just wonder, how do you call a 19 horse or 20 horse field that you only have to do one time a year? And that's always the Derby, and that's the race that more people are going to watch than any other race. So how many hours does it take to prepare for that, Larry?
Well, in an average horse race, let's say it's a 10-race card at Belmont Park, and you've got a half an hour between races. Well, generally you're going to look at those horses, a couple of times before they come onto the track as far as what the silks are going to be. And then when they come onto the track, you'll look at them for 2 minutes or so until you feel like you know who they are. For the Kentucky Derby, I start in like February.
Yeah.
You start watching prep races and reviewing them over and over and seeing these different horses, not only their running styles, but what they look like. You try to get a head start on that. And then as you come up to the last week or so, the kind folks at Churchill Downs will send me the cutouts of all the jockey silks, and I'll make flashcards. I'll put the jockey silks on one side, the horse name and any other information that I think is pertinent, running styles, who the trainer and jockey are, and I'll put that on the other side. And I'll quiz myself in the last week leading up to the Derby, maybe 10 times a day, until I realize my brain is tired and I have to stop, because then it just defeats itself. But it's a process that just goes on and on until the horses actually come onto the track and they played my old Kentucky home. And when that happens, that is the greatest opportunity to see the horses, because they're right in front of you, and you just start your brain again and making sure you know who all 19 or 20 of them are until you're comfortable. And then you let them break out of the starting gate, and there you go for the next 2 minutes. Your legs are shaking, your binoculars are trying to be steady, your palms are sweaty, your heart rate goes up to 200, and they hit the wire, and it's all over.
Just like that. That's it.
Yeah.
That's how you become the best racetrack caller. Okay, that's it. You want to be a great race announcer, you want to be the best, just do what Larry Collmus just told you to do right there. That's it.
And try to get your heart rate from 200 to about 170, and maybe that'll help a little bit.
Oh.
It seems to want to be up closer to 200.
I imagine, because you don't allow yourself to think how many people are tuning in, do you? I mean, you can't think of how many people are watching, much less listening, at the track.
Believe me, you try not to.
Yeah. I try not to.
Kenny, the one thing is, like, the nerves generally are worse leading up to the race than when they're actually running the race, because you get into your own element during the running of the race, where this is what you do. Your brain has been doing this for 30, 40 years, following a bunch of horses around the track, and you're telling people what's going on. So during that time, the nerves are still there, but they do tend to lessen a little bit while the race is running, because you're kind of just doing what you always do, except for the 18 million people part,
yeah,
paying attention to what you're doing. So, and most people are screaming and yelling anyway, so they're not listening. And the call of the race is more for later than for the actual time when the race is going on. I think more people listen to it later than they would when it's actually running, because they're cheering for their horses.
And not to add any more pressure to it, but the words of Larry Collmus live on and on. The rest of us, maybe we make a misspeak or a stumble along the way. We get that corrected. You don't remember any of my reports on Bob Baffert, my reports on no Louisville trainer had won a Kentucky Derby, still haven't, by the way. But you remember what Larry says as they come down the stretch. Well, did I add more pressure going into the Preakness, Larry? Sorry, my friend.
After dealing with the fog of last year's Preakness, I think I'll be okay.
Well, that's why I was going to ask. Last year's Preakness, to me, of all your calls, including finally the one, which I thought was just perfect when American Pharaoh won the Triple Crown, by the way. I just thought that was the perfect, so succinct, dead on. But last year in the fog, and I'm on the backside, and I'm looking at the fog rolling in. It looked like the John Carpenter movie. I thought Adrian Barbeau was going to step out at any moment. It was crazy fog out there. And how in the world you called that? Because if you were right on the track, and I was standing on the track next to Bob Baffert, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see half the race. Even on the monitor, I'm looking up and I'm losing it. I don't know how you did that. That's still to me, your most remarkable call, given the circumstance.
Well, thank you. And there's an interesting little backstory that happened earlier in that week at the Preakness. They were getting the infield set up with all the stuff that's in there, and we realized that there were all these extra concert stages that blocked views of that I had on the backstretch. There was a good, eighth of a mile on the backstretch that was completely blocked, because I call races through binoculars.
Right.
And I couldn't see that area. If it was, maybe 50 yards or so, well, they get through there quick enough that it doesn't bother you. But this is a full eighth of a mile. So normally I don't have this, but the the NBC guys put 2 high-def monitors right in front of me. And as it turns out, I needed them to call almost the entire race because I couldn't see anything. You know, there was no way I was going to be able to see through my binoculars. They don't see through fog. They're not quite that good. You know, maybe a little, you know, $10,000 pair or something can see through fog, but I don't know if that exists. But anyway, I give full credit to the cameramen from NBC and to the guy that directed the show, Pierre Moussa, who was the man that did all the switches to the camera shots. And you know, it was perfect because there was one time on the far turn where they were maybe a 16th of a mile where they just didn't have anything. And I just sort of took my time, and instead of saying, you know, they ran 3/4 in 1:11.23, I said they have run 3/4 of a mile in 1 minute 11.23 seconds as they round the far turn in the fog at Pimlico, and then they appeared again. So there was there was a little bit of time where I had to kill, and then after that it was pretty much okay. So I mean, those guys did a great job of giving me enough shots to call from, and you know, they get the credit. I told Pierre, I said, you called the race, because I wouldn't have been able to see it anyway.
That's what a pro does. Just a little bit more. There's, you know, and just another extra word or two. You're still telling the story. You're letting it move along. And that's what you've been doing since you were 18 years old. I believe you called your first race, you told me before.
Yeah, I was 18. I had been practicing calling races through a tape recorder at the Maryland tracks. They had found a place for me up in the press box at all the different Maryland tracks. The fellow that used to run the press box, Eddie McMullen, was kind enough to find me a little spot, and I would kind of work for him as a gopher. And when the time came one day, Chick Lang Sr., who was the general manager of Pimlico, heard me practicing race calling up in the top level at Pimlico in a little room, and he came down, and his son was the publicity director, and he said, who's that kid up there? He says, that's Larry, you know, wants to be a race caller. And he said, well, let's get him started at Bowie. He can call one a day over the microphone. And that's how it all started. And I remember the first race I called, won by Tiara's Flame, trained by King Leatherberry and ridden by Alberto Delgado.
Wow.
And I was 18 years old, and you know, was backup announcer for 2 years, and then got my first full-time job with Chick Lang Jr. at the Birmingham Turf Club in Alabama, where I was. My claim to fame there was calling the first ever career win of then just plain Donna Barton, who is now Donna Barton Brothers.
Yeah.
So we go back a long way too. We were both 20 years old at the time.
And do you ever get nervous? If you do, I've never seen it. I've certainly never heard it, but being around you before big races, I've never seen it.
I do. Of course I do. Especially when I get up into my perch for the Derby. I think that is the most nervous you ever are, and it does not go away. I mean, this was the 9th Kentucky Derby, and honestly, I think I was more on edge for this Derby than I have been in previous ones, and I think it had to do with the wide openness of the race, the mud again for the 3rd straight year, and I don't know. There was just many factors that get you a little bit on edge, but I try to keep calm and keep laughing, and you know, try to, you know, ease the tension as much as you can in the lead up.
And you know what I liked, you picked up Country House 65-1. You were right on top of it, because you know, a lot of people, let's face it, he's 65-1. Who's going to be looking for Country House coming down the lane? There's not many people that are just sitting up there in the stands. They're going to say, hey, there's Country House.
Well, luckily there were only a couple of horses with yellow colors, you know, so that helped him. And Bodie Express were the only two. So Bodie Express had a red cap, so it was easy to discern the two of those and you know, go from there. So they weren't too muddy when they turned for home, which helped. But there were a lot of them that were still in contention. And honestly, when the rail opened and Code of Honor blasted on through on the inside, I thought he was home free and headed to victory, and all of a sudden Maximum Security's back in front. And it made for a very interesting stretch duel.
On the NBC telecast, perhaps you saw Larry did a great feature on horses' names, going to the Jockey Club and the horses' names and the names they've thrown out there that, well, you certainly have to enunciate some of those names, don't you?
You do, and you have to be careful sometimes too, because some of these guys will get you to, call a horse where if you say the name wrong, it's going to not be a very good thing. I think the one that Tom Durkin always had to deal with was one of my favorites, the horse named Shiny City Shoes, and that was the famous Caesar Kimmel, the horse owner who would purposely do that, right. And he was also the guy that had flat feet. And horses like that. Now the latest one I had to deal with was a horse that, if you look at the name, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal at all, but then after you have to say Irish wristwatch, and if you have to say it 3 times fast, you're going to be saying I was with what. It's difficult to enunciate that one. So sometimes, you just have to be kind of careful. Make sure you say the right thing.
You've called so many. This is I don't know. It's like interviews. I've done a lot. Certainly the stage you've been on and called some of the great races in the last couple of decades. Do you have a favorite or a favorite or 2 calls of yours that you look back on and go, that was a heck of a call I just made. That was a fun race. I enjoyed it. I'm really proud of that.
Well, I think you can only judge your race calls by, what you get to call. And I mean, there's just nothing in the world that will ever compare. And I don't think, in my career, there's no way anything can surpass American Pharoah winning the Triple Crown. Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact that it was, we had all waited 37 years for this to happen since affirmed, and you're up in the booth at Belmont Park calling, the Belmont, not just for NBC, but for the first time for NYRA. That was my first year as the track announcer at Belmont Park, and poor Tom Durkin had gone 24 years calling races there, never got to call the Triple Crown. And then, you step up there and history occurs, and you're the incredibly lucky guy that gets to narrate it. And the fact that, American Pharoah won by 5.5 lengths enabled me to, give a definitive, exciting, dramatic call to what I, and say what I wanted to say. And it was a moment that, just could never be topped. I mean, Justify last year was calling another Triple Crown was incredible. It was fantastic, but it wasn't American Pharoah after 37 years.
Right.
And I don't think anything ever will be again. And the other one that was almost there too was actually American Pharoah again winning the Breeders' Cup Classic and going out a winner like he did. And that was just a complete thrill. And I was just overwhelmed with excitement and joy after both of those races.
Finally, the one, we get him on the show, my friend and the great race caller, Larry Collmus. I really appreciate your time, Larry, and I will see you next week in Baltimore.
Can't wait, Kenny. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
All right. We'll have you on again later on this year. Larry Collmus, it's as good as it gets. That's what we try to do here each week. Stay with us. There's more of the Horse Racing Show coming up.